Today's daf we're going to be learning is about Zarah daf kafav. Today's daf is sponsored by the Sussman family on their Aliyah anniversary. I pronounce that word, Aliyah anniversary. Mazal Tov. As we stepped off the plane 21 years ago with two little boys, we could never have imagined all that Israel would give us these many years, nor could we fathom what our boys would be giving back to the land and nation. Am Yisrael Chai. Today's daf is sponsored by Julie Mendelson in honor of her daughter Hannah's graduation from medical school in Italy last week. Talmud teaches that permission is granted to the doctor to heal and that a doctor is an essential partner with God in the healing of human beings. May you have wisdom, compassion, help from heaven all the days of your profession. Your hard work and persistence inspire us all. Mazal Tov. Now, apropos doctors, we might have some references today. So we'll starting with midwives, moving perhaps to doctors toward the end. Okay, we were in the middle of Okay, we'll have to see how we get there. We're in the middle of not going into a place alone, a secluded place with an Oved Kochavim, idol worshiper. We talked about yesterday, right? Either this is just preventative, like take, precautions where you're going, especially when you're in a room, when you're on a path alone out in the middle of nowhere. All sorts of things you should do. The last thing we talked about was to basically tell them you're going to a farther place when you're really going to a closer place and then quickly turn off the road. And then, you'll hopefully buy yourself time. And by that time, you'll be able to be saved because once you're in the city, they're not going to kill you. So we had a story where this happened. And and in fact, this shows, okay, but everything seems very black and white sometimes in this Masechet, and as in most Masechtot, where it starts off black and white, and then you start seeing all the gray. So this starts off with, we're worried that idol worshippers are going to kill us. It turns out there's also Jews who might be trying to kill us. And we're going to have two stories with Jewish thieves who were trying to potentially kill other Jewish thieves, other Jews. So we started with the story of the listim, right? The bandits that were following the students of Rabbi Akiva, and they claimed they were going to Achziv, and they were really going only to what did they say, right? Sorry, they said they were going to Akko, and they were really going to Achziv. If it's really the Achziv that we know, by the way, it's north of Akko, so they must have been coming from the north, going south, and then they turned off into Achziv, and then the listim were so impressed, they said, "Oh, who's your teacher?" They said Rabbi Akiva, and they said, "Wow, Rabbi Akiva, straight Rabbi Akiva and his students, that they'll never get hurt by any person because they're so wise." Now we're going to hear a similar story with a big difference. Rav Menashe, who, by the way, is in Babylonia. The first story happened with Rabbi Akiva students in Israel. Obviously, it was Akko Ksiv. Now we have Rav Menashe, who's walking Azal Beit Torta. He's going to a place called Beit Torta in Babylonia. Pagu Beganve, again, Jewish robbers attack him, or end up not attack him, but they're, with him on the path. Amru Leila an Kazalta. So they ask, where are you going? Amar Lehen, I'm thinking of, like Little Red Riding Hood, right? Where are you going? Amar Lehem Pupatita. So he says, I'm going to Pupatita. Kimata lebeit Torta, Parish. But when he got to Beit Torta, he quickly turned off the road. Amrule Talmida de Yehuda Ramayat. So now they said to him, this group of bandits said to him, you must be the student of Yehuda the Ramai. Okay, in other words, this is instead of saying, wow, who's your teacher? And I'm so impressed, they're saying, oh, Rabbi Yehuda, who's known to be a Ramai, who's a trickster, you must be his student, and because look how you behaved. Okay, now they're attacking him for being smart and wise about how to finagle his way out of them, not to get killed by them. Amr lehu yiditule. I understand people like you, he says to them, Yehe Ravad lehavuhani inashe b'shamte. I'm going to put you all in excommunication. And he excommunicates them for the way they spoke about Rav Yehuda. Azlu avdu gnevata esrim v'tartin shnin. Now these robbers continued robbing for 22 years, velo itzlachu, and they never were successful. Okay, they always lost their money and whatever it is, they were very unsuccessful. Kevan dechazu, finally, it took them 22 years. They finally realized atukulu tavu shamtayu, and they went back to right the Bach adds the word delishru shamtayu. They went to him to say, "Can you undo this excommunication?" But Hababu Chag Yerdana, there was one weaver among them. The weavers were always considered the lowly, or often in many sugyot, they're considered the lowly people. Not sure why they had such a bad rap, but they do. They get a bad rap in the Talmud. There was one weaver, Delo Atu L'Sharyue Shamte. He said, I'm not going to try to undo this excommunication, achla aryeh, and he was punished that a lion ate him. Hainu de amrei nashi, and this is what people say. Girdana de lo taizan, a weaver who is not humble, which might give you a reason for why they thought the weavers weren't so, they were arrogant, perhaps. I don't know why. I don't know why weavers particularly would be arrogant. It's also seen as a profession that doesn't make a lot of money. We saw that also in places. So it's interesting. They're also arrogant. I don't know. But shata b'tzir mishneh, but they lose a year of their lives. Okay. In other words, if they're arrogant, then they're good. When they're not humble, they lose a year of their lives. This is like a quip people say on the street. And you see it from the story because he died before the rest of them. And another kind of point, zoom out of the story and see something else bigger here, bigger picture. Go look at the difference between the thieves in Babylonia and the thieves in Israel. This is one of those statements of saying, oh, they're better in Israel, because the thieves in Israel recognized Rabbi Yehuda's greatness, and the thieves in Babylonia put down Rabbi Yehuda and said, oh, you must have a rabbi who's a trickster, and that's where you learn to be like this. So it's also kind of a contrast if you take those two stories. Okay, now we're moving on to our sugya for today, our main sugya, which is all sorts of things that Jews should not do for Gentiles and Gentiles should not do for Jews. Again, Gentiles being here seeming pretty clearly, we're talking about idol worshippers. I'll point out that the Chazon Ish basically says, don't try this all at home, and this is all not relevant anymore. And things are different. The way the world went in those days and the way God's presence was in the world is different. And therefore, this whole idea of, the idea really of not bringing more evil into the world on the one hand, and we're going to see the other side is the fear that these people will kill us. Okay, so that's a continuing theme, but we're going to add another theme because we're going to see this in two directions about who can do what for who. So let's just start and you'll see. So a Jewish midwife or a Jewish woman should not help with the birth of an idol worshiper. Why? Because it's bringing more idol worshippers into the world. And we don't want to help bring more idol worshippers into the world because, again, these idol worshippers are the symbol of evil and people who want to kill us and all that. Again, it's always a little bit challenging to understand this. Again, we have to just take it as it is here, but you'll see that even the Gemara gets into the complexity of it. So the Mishnah sounds pretty simple. Because we're bringing a child into the world who's going to be an idol worshiper. Now in the Mishnah they say, and it's important, we're going to qualify this a little bit and see there's some chloket. An idol worshiper can deliver the child of a Jewish woman. By Israel lo tinach bena shel ovedet kochavim. So again, same idea here. A Jewish woman should not nurse the child of a Gentile. Aval ovedet, again, Gentile meaning idol worshiper. Aval ovedet kochavim nikah bena shel Yisrael birishuta. Here they add one important word. The idol worshiper woman who wants to nurse the child of a Jew, or if a Jew wants to hire a nursemaid, can do it in the Jew's domain. Okay, now this is going to be clear that they also meant that in the beginning, and we'll see exactly what it means for Shuta. And we're going to start with a braita in the Gemara that shows there's two opinions here. Our Mishnah just gave us one opinion, but we're going to see there's two opinions. Tanu Rabbanit. Ba Yisrael lo tiyaled et ha'ovedet kochavim mipnei shemiyaled ben la'avodah zarah. That's exactly what it says in our Mishnah. By the way, some versions of the Mishnah don't have these words, mipnei shemiyaled ben la'avodah zarah. It just had the halacha without the explanation. And then the braita here adds the explanation, which is because we're bringing another idol worshiper into the world. V'ovedet kochavim lo tiyaled ba Yisrael, right? You can't have an idol worshiper midwife, because we're worried they might murder the child. That goes back to what we saw yesterday. There was a concern they might murder the baby. Divrei Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir is concerned with something that our Mishnah is not concerned with. That it's possible they might kill the baby. And therefore it's dangerous and don't put yourself in that situation. Now the rabbis who permit this, who seemingly is the position in the Mishnah, so I said we're going to qualify the Mishnah a little, says you can have them deliver your children, as long as there's other people standing there watching. Because if somebody's watching, there's no way she's going to kill the child. Rabbi Meir omer, afilu acherot amdot al gaban nami lo. That doesn't help. Okay, even having other people stand there. Why? Dezimnin demankale yada aputa vekatla leva lo mitchaze. It's a very easy way to kill a child, right? There's that very soft spot on the baby's head, and she could just put her finger in there, kill the child, and no one will even see. So she has a way to hide it. If you think about it, also in those days, it was more common than now that the baby will die in childbirth, right? Unfortunately, it happens today as well, but much more common in those days. And therefore, she could say, oh, the child just didn't make it. And no one would notice that she was the one who killed the child. So Rabbi Meir is worried. He says, even having other people there doesn't really help. And he's going to bring a support for his reading. It's not exactly proving it, but it somewhat proves it, or it proves at least his concern that they kill babies. There were two idol worshiper women speaking one to the other. And one said to the other, Molda Yehudiata, bat Molda Yehudiata. She was insulting her friend and said, you're the midwife of the Jews, the daughter of the midwife of the Jews. Okay, well, what are you doing being a midwife of all these Jews? Okay, you see, by the way, that the same way, our halacha is telling us don't do to them. They saw it as demeaning for them to be, she was insulting her friend by saying, oh, you're the midwife of the Jews. Amrale la, she said to her, what do you mean? Nefishim bishata dahi tata. Okay, so like a lot of evil should befall this woman, meaning basically you, okay, the one who insulted her. She said to the one who insulted her, evil should befall you. I spilled so much blood of the Jews as a midwife of them, like the foam of the river. Okay, in other words, I killed lots of Jews as a midwife, and she was bragging to her friend, and that's what Rabbi Meir says. You see, this story proves that they were able to kill a lot of Jewish babies, and therefore we should avoid these idol worshiper women being our midwives. Rabbanan Amrilach, when the rabbis heard that story, their response was, or the rabbis could respond. I don't think they were actually, I don't know if they were actually there in conversation, but they could say, Lohi, b'milta ba'al mahudu ukimta. She was just responding to her friend. It doesn't really mean that she actually killed all those Jewish children. She was just saying it as if like I could have, or trying to brag, but people brag about all sorts of things, doesn't mean they actually did them. So the rabbis didn't take it like that, and that's why the rabbis were much less concerned. Now, what this didn't really prove is that they could do it and get away with it. I guess it proves that they did and got away with it because, right, no one really knew she did it. And she was saying, look, I did this. There's just no way to prove that she had other women watching her. It doesn't exactly prove the exact machloka between them, but it could be used as a possible source. Now we're going to get to the nursing. Bat Yisrael lo tanik. So again, we're going to have a braita that shows, just like Rabbi Meir and the rabbis disagreed about the first topic, about having idol worshippers as midwives, same thing about having idol worshippers as nursemaids. Bat Yisrael lo tanik. Tanu Rabbanan, braita. Bat Yisrael lo tanik bina shel ovedet kochavim. Mipnei shemegadel pen la'avodah zarah. So again, we have this issue that if you nurse, okay, we didn't see, right, nursing didn't come up in the Mishnah at all, but now we're going to talk about nursing, right? It didn't come up. No. So now we're going to talk about nursing. Also nursing, because what are you doing? You're raising an idol worshiper child. You're helping this child, stay in the world. Rabbi Meir. And you shouldn't use an idol worshiper nursemaid because we're concerned that they're going to possibly murder your child. That's what Rabbi Meir says. Chachamim omrim, no, just like before. Now, we had in the Mishnah said, we did have it in the Mishnah. The Mishnah said you could do it birishuta, in her domain. So now we're going to say in her domain, meaning when there's other people there. Okay, so as long as there's other people there watching, it's fine. But not just her and the child. Rabbi Meir omer, afilu achirot omdot al gaban nami lo, dezimni deshayfa lasama ladad me'abaye v'katlale. He says that won't help because what could she do? Just like with the baby, there was a way she could have killed the baby without anyone noticing by just putting her finger into the head and crushing, and killing the baby like that, no one would notice. With the nursing, she could put some poison on her breast, had them outside the room. That's Abaye, is outside. Then go into the room with all the Jewish women there watching, nurse the baby. The baby will die. No one will ever know that it had to do with the poison that she put on her breast, and therefore it's a concern. That's what Rabbi Meir says. Now the question is, why did we need to show this machloket Rabbi Meir and the rabbis in both cases? Why couldn't you just have inferred it's true for midwives, it should be true for nursemaids, and the reverse? Utsrifa. If you had the miyaledet, the midwife case, you would say that's a case where she really can't get away with doing it. There's women in the room. It'd be very hard. They could actually see her killing the baby by that soft spot in the head. They're there, right? It could be noticeable. She could get caught. And that's why the rabbi said it's fine. She could have put this salmon, this poison, right, on her breast outside, Abaye, outside the kalale, and kill the child, and no one would ever know. Rabbi Meir. Maybe the rabbis agree with Rabbi Meir. In that case, you shouldn't have her be your nursemaid. If you had the issue just of nursing, you would say it's the same logic, but in the reverse order, which is Rabbi Meir dasur. That's what Rabbi Meir forbids, specifically in that case only, maybe you would think. Because Mishum because she'll put it on outside and no one will ever know. But maybe Rabbi Meir would agree with the rabbis with the miyaledet. If she's delivering the child, it would be hard for her to do that with other people standing there in the room watching her, and therefore it's tzricha. And that's why you need both cases, to understand that they actually disagree in both cases. Uribinhi. Now we're going to bring a contradiction. Yehudit, in this braita it says, Yehudit miyaledet ovedet kochavim b'sachar, aval lo b'china. Okay, until now we've really been focusing a lot on the issue of having the ovedet kochavim, the idol worshiper woman, either deliver your child or nurse your child. Now we're going to move specifically to the other issue, which is what a Jew is allowed to do for an idol worshiper. So it said in the Mishnah very clearly, and there was no machloket about this, that you shouldn't deliver their children, you shouldn't nurse their children, okay? Because you're basically helping bring children into the world. So now we have a braita, because the braita says, Yehudit miyaledet ovedet kochavim b'sachar v'lo b'chinam. Now note this specifically about delivering a child. So the midwife, she can be a midwife for an idol worshiper, b'sachar v'lo b'chinam. Not for free, but yes, for pay. If they offer to pay you, you do it. Okay? Now, why is this? So, Rav Yosef, b'sachar shari mishum eva. This is an obvious thing that I'm sure you were thinking about, which is it's going to create animosity. If they offer them, it's one thing if they say, well, you do it for free, they'll understand. Lots of people don't do things for free for anybody. But if they offer to pay you, why wouldn't you be their midwife? So basically, if they say we're going to pay you, you have to do it. Otherwise, it's going to create animosity and hatred. And we never want hatred. More hatred between the idol worshippers and the Jews creates more problems for the Jews in general. So for that reason, you're allowed to do it. Now, again, be very clear here. It's midwife, specifically, Jewish midwife to deliver children of the idol worshiper is permitted. Rav Yosef comes and explains, right? It's permitted for if you're getting paid, and Rav Yosef explains the reason, because of Eva. Now we're going to have 3 attempts of Rav Yosef to extend this to other situations, and each time Abaye is going to say no. Okay, so let's start. Number 1, Sava Rav Yosef Lamema. Rav Yosef wanted to say, Olude ovedet kochavim b'shabta b'sachar shari mishum eva. Well, on Shabbat, you can also be a midwife, even though sometimes that involves chilul Shabbat, because you can also be a midwife for an idol worshiper, or it seems here any Gentile, because of Eva. Because if you don't agree to do it on Shabbat, they're also going to hate you. There's a debate here exactly what melachot we're talking about, even melachot d'oraita, would they vow for melachot d'oraita? But it seems like whatever melachot, we're going to allow it, Rabbi Yosef thought to say, also because of Eva. So we're going to extend if you get paid to be a midwife to if you get paid to be a midwife on Shabbat. Because if you say, I won't do it on Shabbat. Now, the reason is because the midwives were delivering Jewish babies on Shabbat. So if they were delivering Jewish babies on Shabbat, and let's say even maybe making money off, right, getting paid for that. Again, there's a whole question about how you get paid for work you did on Shabbat. We'll put that issue aside. But if you say, no, I won't do it for the idol worshippers, they're going to hate you. So that's what Rav Yosef thought to say. But Amar le Abaye, now each time Abaye is going to reject and say no, because you have a good excuse. The assumption is if you have a good excuse, it won't cause the animosity. Now it's interesting because it's not like they always ask you what your excuse is and whether or not they'd accept this is a good question. But Abaye says as long as you have an excuse, then it won't cause this animosity. So Yachle Lememrala, you could say to her, Didan Demanatre Shabta Mechalalin Alayim. I'm allowed to be Mechalel Shabbat for someone who also keeps Shabbat. But Didchu, you, the Lomanatre Shabta, you don't keep Shabbat, Lo Mechalalina. Now, this is based on a principle. V'chalel alav Shabbat harbe, kadeshi yikayem Shabbatot harbe, right? So you can be Mechalel Shabbat for someone so that they can keep other Shabbatot. But these people aren't keeping other Shabbatot, so I can't be Mechalel Shabbat for you. And therefore, the assumption is that's something they'll understand. Whether or not you think they would, it's a good question. Abaye says, no, it doesn't apply there. Second attempt of Rav Yosef to apply it to something else. Savar Rav Yosef Lemeimer, Onuke b'sachar shari mishumeva. Just like before, until now, we've been comparing midwives and nursemaids. So it sounds like you can nurse their children on Shabbat also for if they're paying, I'm sorry, not Shabbat, nurse their children in general if they offer to pay you, right? Just like you're not allowed to deliver their babies and you're not allowed to nurse their babies. But if we already say, well, you can deliver their babies if they offer to pay you because it caused them to hate you, well, then also you can nurse their children if they offer to pay you. So she could say, listen, if she's not married, interesting that non-married women worked as nursemaids also. I didn't know that was possible, but I guess it is. If you're not married, you could say, listen, I want to get married. If I'm nursing, it's going to prevent me from getting married. You're right. Miriam also was thank you. She was single. Wait, but Miriam nursed Moshe? I'm sorry. Now I'm just confused. Miriam was there while Yocheved, where they took him to Mitzrayim to nurse. I don't know why you mentioned that. Anyway, whatever. I'll keep with the dot. So now what do we have? We want to apply this, but Abaye says there's all sorts of reasons why a woman why a woman would not want to nurse. If she's single, it's going to mess her up, and people won't want to marry her because she's nursing. If she's a married woman, she's going to say, I'll have milk dripping out of me all the time. My husband will be disgusted by it. I'm not doing it. So there's all sorts of reasons why a woman could say, I'm not interested in doing this, and therefore it won't cause animosity. Savar Rav Yosef Lemema, Rav Yosef wanted to say, a third attempt, this is a figure we're now going to get into. There's a braita that says, if you have idol worshippers, or ro'ei be'emadaka, here we see again, just like we started today, there could be Jews that are in the same category as well, and those are the ones who grazed with small animals. They were known to be robbers. They would graze with their animals in other people's fields. In general, if you remember, we learned about them in Sanhedrin. They can't be judges. They're just not, they weren't good people in general. If you can stereotype people, okay, which problem in and of itself. Everything about here is stereotyping people. So these people are in a category where loma alim v'loma ridim, meaning you can't throw them into a pit, but that's loma ridim. But if they're in a pit, you don't have to actually save them from the pit. So if it says that, asuke b'sachar shari mishum eva, well, if they offer to pay you, then theoretically that should be permitted because of eva. So Amar le Abaye, Yachol Omar lo, Kai Berea Igra, Inami Nikita Lizim Nilebe Daval. Abaye says, what do you mean? You could say, listen, I don't have time to start helping you right now because my son's stuck up in a roof and I have to go get him down. Or they just gave me a subpoena to the court and I have to go there. And sorry, I just don't have the time to help you. So that's another reason why this isn't one of the lists. So it seems like the only thing, at least according to Abaye, that would be permitted because of Eva is specifically to deliver their children. Now, since we started on this topic, Tane Rabbi Abaye came to Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Abaye brought the following braita in front of Rabbi Yochanan. Ha'ovdei kochavim v'ro'eh be'ema daka lo ma'alim v'lo moedim. Okay, so he says, Ovdei kochavim and these ro'eh be'ema daka, as we said before, you don't have to take them up, and you shouldn't really take them up because it's the same idea here. You shouldn't help them because you're just bringing bad back into the world. But you also can't put them into the pit. To go that far is too far. Aval haminim v'hamisorot v'hamumarim moridim v'lo ma'alim. Now we get to the real challenging part, which is there's certain people you can actually put into the bowl. Okay, who are these people? Okay, we're at the top of Amabet now. The minim, okay, which we're going to define a little bit. It's unclear, but we usually define it as heretics. It's unclear what heretics necessarily means. Misorot are people who Rashi says. So first of all, Rashi says minim or komarim l'avodah zarah. They're like the priests of the idol worship. Whether he even says whether they're goyim or whether they're Jews, it doesn't matter. But they're higher ups in the Avodah Zarah world. Masorot are people, Rashi says, who basically tattletale to the authorities, turn people in, they're informers, and they cause Jews to have to pay lots of money. And Mumarim are people who leave the religion. So they're Moridim v'lo ma'alim. Okay, those people you can even put in the pit. Okay, now this is the Chazon Ish goes off on this and says, there's no way we do this nowadays, and don't think this was like in a different time. And he basically neutralizes this whole sugya and says, don't think that this is relevant. And they were living in different times. And he, gives a whole description as to how things were different. And we were living more under God's, we're much more distant now. The world doesn't work that way anymore. So for all those who are concerned about this, he definitely says, no way, no how. Anyway, so Rabbi Abaye brought this braita in front of Rabbi Yochanan. Amarle, so Rabbi Yochanan says to him, how could you possibly say this, at least about the mumar? It says, L'chol avedat achicha l'rabot et hamumar. Fa'at amart moridim. When it talks about avedah, it says in any aveda of your brother. Now, your brother means anyone who's Jewish. Now, Jews consider people who leave the religion, who are Jews, as Jews. So a mumar who left the religion, you have to return their lost items to them. And you're going to say we could throw them into a pit? No way, no how. Smei mikam mumar. So he says, get rid of mumar on your list. It shouldn't be here. So the Gemara suggests, V'lishanile could have answered him, there's two different kinds of mumarim. There's people who don't keep halacha because they have desires and they just can't, they want to, that's l'teavon, they're hungry, hungry could mean just they have a desire for something, and they do it and they eat nevela because it looks good and they're tempted by it. Not because they're angry at God and want to leave the religion. But, and then there's a mumar, and we've seen this distinction before. There's a mumar who leaves the religion, and doesn't do mitzvot because they want to say, I don't want to have anything to do with this anymore. So you could say that the mumar that you throw into the pit is the one who does it lahachis, and the one who you actually have to return their lost items is one who just eats not kosher because it's just better and you just want to eat it. So that's a different story. So now they say, why didn't Rabbi Yochanan answer the contradiction in that way? To which the answer is kasavar, and I told you it's not so clear what it means, even though we read Rashi's interpretation. Kasavar ochel nevelo lahachis minhu, because Rabbi Yochanan thought that ochel nevelo lahachis, if you leave the religion intentionally because you want to get rid of God in your life, that's a heretic, and therefore mumar. Oh, by the way, the censor turned the word meshumad into mumar. My Gemara, it says mumar. The real word is meshumad. Okay, it's the same thing, but it's a different word. I don't know why one was censored out and one was what the difference is really, but it's really a meshumad. So meshumad or a mumar, either which way you read it. That is someone who did it, right? So if you wanted to distinguish and say that, Ochel Nevel Lahachis is a mean, which means that the mumar or meshumad is actually someone who does it just out of desire. And that already means then you couldn't answer the contradiction in that way. So there's a debate, which we're going to see right now, is a mean a mumar Ochel Nevel Lahachis and a meshumad is Ochel Nevel Leteavon, or not necessarily. So we're going to see that right now. Itmar, Mumar, Pligi Rav Acha Ravina. Okay, besides that Rabbi Yochanan seemingly had an opinion about this, also Rav Acha and Ravina disagreed. Chad Amar Letevon Mumal, or Meshumad, Lahachis Min Have. Okay, so one thinks that both are included in that line because one is the min and one is the Meshumad. V'chad Amar, Filu Lahachis Nami Mumar. No, mean is not what you thought it was. And this is going to go back to what Rashi said. Ela mean, zeha oveda avodah zarah. A mean is an idol worshiper. That's a heretic. But when it says mumar or meshumad, that's someone who leaves the religion, lahachis. Okay, and then possibly you could say if they left, if they just aren't keeping mitzvot because they just desire not to do mitzvot, that's they're having strong temptations. That's a different story. That's not even in this category. Meitive. Now we're going to have a difficulty with the first opinion. Because it says here, if you eat some sort of bug or mosquito, you're a meshumad or a mumar. Now, the assumption is nobody eats bugs because they're tempted to eat them and they look yummy. Okay, the only reason you'd eat this is to say, I don't care about religion anymore. And yet they call you a mumar. And opinion number one said, you're a mean, you're a heretic. So hacha de lahachisu v'katani mumar. It's clearly lahachis, and you're called a mumar. So they're saying no. Hatam ba'ilamitam tamadi isura. No, it could be you're really tempted to eat them. And in fact, I saw it when I was in, I think it was Thailand. They were selling bugs for all different prices and all different kinds of disgusting bugs. And apparently people eat them. It's, it is a delicacy in certain cultures. And, they just, here they're not saying it was a delicacy, but they're saying they wanted to see what it tasted like. So it could be you're tempted to eat something that's forbidden. The forbidden fruit is always, tempting. So maybe it could mean that, and it's not necessarily a contradiction. Amar. Now, yes, so it's true there's kosher fried locusts, but I think they're talking here about locusts are one thing, but I mean, again, I don't know from these things. I don't eat locusts. I don't eat any of these things. But mosquito, it's not even the same as the locust and other kind of bigger bugs. Amar. Now we're going to go back to some line and say this line doesn't make so much sense. In the case of all these people that are the mumar, the meshuma, the mean, the musil, all these people that are in that complicated category, moridim avaloma alim. You can put them down in the pit, but you don't have to take them out. First of all, the but doesn't really make sense in this line. And hashta achute machtinan, if you can put them into the pit, asuke mibaya, do they even need to tell you you don't need to take them out? Of course, if you put them in the pit, you put them there to die. Why would we say, and you don't have to save them if they get into a pit? Of course, you don't have to save them. You can even put them in there intentionally. So we're going to have three different explanations. I don't think they disagree with each other, really. They're just providing possible options of what it means. Don't take them out. Am Rav Yosef bar Chama, Am Rav Sheshet, Lo nitzracha she'im hayta ma'ala bebo megarera. So we have this one explanation brought down the name of Rav Sheshet, that if there was a step in the pit where they could presumably get themselves out through using that step, you could take the step out. Okay, you could kind of, take it, like undo it and take it away. You could give an excuse. Now, here we're back to this world of excuses. It's a little bit different the way they're using it here, but it's the same concept that you could claim that what? You have this answer, this explanation. I don't want my animals to step on the step. And now we're going to go with two different explanations here. One is, and fall into the pit and die. In other words, I'm not doing it you could claim, I'm not doing it not to help you. I'm doing this just because I want to prevent my animals from doing this. So now what they're saying is you could even take an action, forget about, you don't have to save them. You can take an action to prevent them from getting out as long as you can claim you're doing it for some other reason. Okay, so you can say that's what they're telling you by the words, but you don't have to take them out, which means you can even remove this step because you can claim, I don't want my animal to step down and fall into the pit. The Rabbeinu Hananel says that the issue of the fall, you could claim that you're actually trying to help them, that if my animal stepped down, my animal could fall on top of you and definitely kill you. Okay, but I think it makes more sense to go the other way. Rabbi Rav Yosef to Amri Travayu, lo nitzracha she'im hayta even al pi abol should be born up el mechaseh. Amar la burichi vata ilave. If it's open, which means again they can maybe somehow get out of the pit, but you can cover it. If it had a cover, a stone cover, you can put the stone over it in order to say, listen, my animals want to walk by and I need to put the cover on. Now, once you put the cover on, there's no way they're getting out of that pit. So these are all, that's why I think the first explanation makes more sense. These are all actions that one can do that will prevent the person from getting out on their own. Besides that you're not helping them, you're actually making it worse. Rabina Amar, Shimaya Sulam Misalko. If there was a ladder, you could take the ladder out. Again, what's your reason? Amar Bina Lachute Burime Igara. I have to get my son down from the roof, so I need the ladder. And you can take the ladder out and prevent them from getting out. Again, very hard to understand the sugya because it's it's kind of harsh about how we can sort of take the law into our own hands. And again, we must be referring to people that are seen as a hazard to society. Otherwise, it's very hard to understand this. And like I said, the Chazon Ish neutralizes this completely in our day. Okay, next braita. Tanu Rabbanan. Yisrael mal et ha'ovei kochavim l'shum ger. Okay, this makes a lot of sense. If an idol worshiper wants to convert to Judaism, so the Jew can circumcise for the purposes of ger. But from there they infer lafuke l'shum morna dilo. What is morna? Rashi says tolat sheyesh lo b'or lato. If he has some sort of worm there and you need to cut it off, and they need to be circumcised for that reason, like a medical procedure, you're not allowed to do it. Okay, now. Now, this, by the way, okay, so the whole issue of doing this, the whole question about being a doctor, let's say, for non-Jewish people. Okay, again, let's assume we're talking idol worshippers, and let's assume already this isn't so relevant nowadays because most people aren't idol worshippers. Even if they are idol worshippers, they're not in this category of idol worshippers that we're talking about. But this also, by the way, because of Ava, it's permitted. Okay, so if someone, again, it would be the difference between free and doing it pro bono or getting paid. Okay, so the commentaries talk about here that if you're doing it mishum, if it's someone's asking you to do a medical procedure and they're paying you for it, you can't say, "Oh, sorry, you're an idol worshiper. I'm not willing to do this." Okay, because again, that obviously will cause it's no different really than the midwife that we saw before. Okay, right. We tried to use other situations to compare the midwife. We weren't successful, but this seems to be pretty clear comparison. That's what the commentaries say. Now, what about Oved Kochavim lo yimol et Yisrael? Rabbi Meir. Oh, we're back to Rabbi Meir and the rabbis. Rabbi Meir says, don't have a Gentile do your circumcision because they might murder you. Okay, do someone else's, your son's circumcision. וחכמים אומרים, עובי כוכבים על ישראל בזמן שאחרים עומדים על גבו, אבל בינו לבינו לא. Okay, but the rabbis say it's fine as long as there's somebody else there. Now we're going to go back. This is going to be just like the previous sugya about the midwife. Rabbi Meir אומר, אפילו אחרים עומדים על גבו נמי לא, דזימני דמצלה לסכינו, משווה לקרות שופחה. Right? You can easily say, oh, the knife slipped, and then you can create a situation where the penis gets severed, and that would be a child who can no longer have children. V'sava Rabbi Meir ovei kochavim lo. Now we're going to have a problem. So that fit exactly with the model that we saw before. Rabbi Meir is worried they could do it and claim that they didn't do anything. It wasn't their fault, right? And therefore, it doesn't really help having people there. The rabbis think it helps if there's people. But now we're going to say, wait a minute. There seems to be a contradiction with Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir, Sava Rabbi Meir ovei kochavim lo. Rabbi Meir thinks an idol worshiper can't do a circumcision. Urimini says in a different source, Ir she'em bar rofei Yisrael, v'yesh bar rofei kuti, v'rofei ovei kochavim, yimol ovei kochavim v'al yimol kuti. Okay, if there's a Jewish doctor, interesting that the Moalim were doctors, okay, if there's a Jewish doctor, I'm sorry, there is no Jewish doctor, but there is a kuti, right, Shomanim, and an akum, an idol worshiper, which should you better use? Interesting that he says this, right? So he actually, his makes more, right? His makes less sense. You should actually use the idol worshiper, not the kuti. He views the kuti as worse than the idol worshiper. So right now you see an idol worshiper can do a brit milah. And Rabbi Yehuda Omer Yamul Kuti Va'al Yamul Ove Kochavim. Rabbi Yehuda says, take the kuti over the Ove Kochavim. That would sound much more like Rabbi Meir's position, because Rabbi Meir in general thinks that the idol worshippers are suspect, that they're going to kill people, right? Kill Jews. So the obvious answer is ipuch. Flip who says what. And it must be that Rabbi Meir was the one who said no to the Gentile, yes to the kuti, and that would fit in, right? No idol worshiper, yes, Shomrni. Okay, and that would fit perfect with what we said. So ipuch. Rabbi Meir Omer Yamul Kuti V'Lo Ove Kochavim, and Rabbi Yehuda Omer Ove Kochavim V'Lo Kuti. So Rabbi Yehuda prefers the idol worshiper, Rabbi Meir prefers the kuti. Okay, but that doesn't fit either, because Savar Rabbi Yehuda Ove Kochavim Shapir Dami. Does Rabbi Yehuda really think that it's better to have an idol worshiper do it? And you probably were thinking about this, but not. Now we'll see. V'hatanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer Minayin Lemilabo Ve'Kochavim Shi Psula. Says, forget about fear of maybe they'll kill you. There's a different problem. It's not even a kosher circumcision. Shenema V'ata Et Briti Tishmol, which means basically only people who are Jewish can circumcise. So how are we allowing, right? If you're going to say, Yehuda is the one who says yes to the Oved Kochavim, to the idol worshiper, no to the kuti, doesn't make any sense, because we don't allow an idol worshiper, even just any non-Jewish person to do brit milah. They're not part of the brit. So don't flip it. Go back and say Rabbi Yehuda has this issue that it has to be a Jew doing it. Rabbi Meir says in general, don't let the Oved Kochavim do anything, because they might actually, right, the idol worshiper might kill you, but not if he's a specialist. And this makes a lot of sense. He's a rofe mumche. He's a known doctor. I'll just go with one more line. Just like Rav Dimi came and said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, if he's a mumche, it's permitted, because why? It's obvious. He has his reputation on the line. He's not going to kill this Jewish baby just to ruin his entire reputation. He's a prominent doctor. If he did that, right, he'd lose his license or whatever it might be, or people just would stop using him. So there's sometimes where, right, if we talk about all the complexity, which is really what we got into today, which is, on the one hand, things very black and white, and on the other hand, they're very complex, that, in certain situations, there's really no concern because of external circumstances. Just like maybe we shouldn't do things for them, but if there's external circumstances like animosity that's going to be created that could cause all sorts of, there's ramifications to all sorts of actions, and then that would mean that we would have to do it. So, and same thing there, they would be allowed to do it if there's other ramifications. Okay, so again, the issue of the halachic problem of Afa Briti Tishmor, that's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. That's not Rabbi Meir's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't think that that's an issue. Okay, I didn't research this issue so much. It would be interesting. Maybe I'll have time before tomorrow about there really opinions that you could have someone who's not Jewish do a circumcision for you, forgetting, like we said, the halachic issue doesn't have to be a Jew who's a mohel, right? It seems here Rabbi Meir is not concerned about that at all. So I'll try to research it a little more for tomorrow. Let's do a review of our daf. We started with those two stories of the thieves who were, the Jewish thieves who basically the Jews managed to, the students of these other rabbis managed to get away from. We did the comparison. Then we talked about what actions a Jew can do for an idol worshiper and what actions an idol worshiper can do a Jew or can't. Okay. And in what circumstances can they or can't they? And what are the different opinions? Rabbi Meir was always very strict, was much more concerned about there being murder here going on, and much more worried about that possibility, whereas the rabbis were not so worried about that possibility. As long as there was somebody else there, the rabbis seemed to think that would keep them in check, just like the Rofei Mumcha would keep them in check, right? There's all these ways that you can neutralize the concern for that, and then nothing's an issue anymore. Then Rav Yosef brought up, the braita, the contradiction from the braita caused Rav Yosef to say there's the issue of animosity, that if it's going to cause animosity, no, but he wanted to extend it to all sorts of situations, and Abaye limited him and said, no, I don't think so. Because as long as you have an excuse, then there won't be animosity. And then we got into the whole sugya, which is very complicated to swallow sugya about. You could even put someone in a bore, depending on, there's gradations. And here, interestingly, the Oved Kochavim was not on the severe end there, right? The Oved Kochavim, you don't have to save, but you can't put them in the bor. Whereas if they're a min, a masul, a mumau, they were in a much worse category. You could even put them in a bor, which again, we said, Chasam Ish says, this is not relevant anymore. And we had a machloket about whether we distinguish between Jews who are not keeping mitzvah because they want to go against religion in general, or just because they're doing it out of temptation. Is that in this category? Is it not in this category? We had different opinions, and we got to why you needed to say avaloma alim. Obviously, if more redeemed than loma alim, you don't have to take them out. You don't have to save them. So we had all sorts of situations where you could even go farther as to make it even more difficult for them to get out, as long as you had some good reason why you were doing it or some good explanation as to why you were doing that kind of thing. And then we ended with the circumcision issue, kind of in both directions, who can circumcise who. And we will get back to that tomorrow. Wishing everyone a good day.